Summer of 2023 is almost wrapped up and it hosted the biggest Women's World Cup ever. So let's talk about it. It definitely, in a lot of ways, feels like we have been robbed from really celebrating how big of a World Cup this has been following the events that happened, the celebration, the final, everything around the Spanish Federation, Luis Rubiales, and we've talked about that. We've talked plenty about that, but unfortunately that continues and remains to be a very strong conversation that we must keep engaging in. But with that being present, it does rob and take away from a lot of the joy that we got to enjoy at the World Cup and just how big this World Cup was for a women's game. So before more international games kick off, we've got the leagues also starting very, very soon. The Champions League qualifiers are also on the brinks. I will be taking a final close look about what this World Cup meant and how it will affect all the leagues kicking off very, very soon. When the 2023 Women's World Cup was announced to be the first 32 nation edition World Cup, it was an expanded nature World Cup, bigger than anything we've ever seen before. There was a lot of naysayers, there was a lot of doubters, and understandably there was a concern of the gap being shown even in a much bigger way. Those double-digit scorelines, we were going to see more of them, and those beatings were going to happen a little too often. And whilst that was a valid concern in some areas, there was also a lot of arguments to kind of actually go against it. And what this World Cup showed us is that not only was that concern hugely debunked, but a lot of the naysayers and a lot of the doubters had some stern answers to their questions. Something important to understand is that when this expanded nature of the World Cup was announced, a lot of federations had an incentive of, okay, we actually have the biggest chance we've ever had to get our nation to the biggest stage. And that naturally, despite a lot of the fights that are going on and despite the horrid federation treatment that we have seen this World Cup, a lot of the nations saw that this was an opportunity to get money in their pockets. And if you've learned a thing or two about those federations, is they love any loophole to either keep money in their pockets or generate some kind of money in their pockets. So in some ways, there was always an incentive behind a lot of those nations that have never even gone close to a World Cup qualifier to be like, right, we actually have a chance now. This confederation that we're battling it in, either CONCACAF or even European or whatever, any confederation they were qualifying from, right now they had the biggest chance ever. Great example is Morocco. Looking at Morocco 2019 or Morocco 2023, it is light and day, desert and sea, sky and whatever else you want to say. Like Morocco, what we saw 2 months ago is completely different to what we had anticipated it would be 3 years ago. The federation in the last 7 years spent more money collectively than they had ever spent since the foundation of that team. I want you to think about how impactful that is. They launched 2 tiers of professional football for their first ever women's professional leagues. They spent tens of millions in facilities that are both for the men's and the women's national teams, including the youth national teams. They also brought in a very, very trusted and highly tested staff, from the head coach to the assistant managers to the analysts to everything. So Morocco is a great example of why there was a great incentive. Had it been 2019, maybe the federation would have not had that motivation that they felt going into 2023. They invested, they put a 5-year plan, which is really funny to look back at those 2019 plans that the federation was putting. One of them was, make it to the knockout stages of the African Cup. Before you even know it, they're 2022 African Cup finalists. Another goal on that plan was, make it very far in the qualifiers and possibly qualify for the Women's World Cup. Well, not only did they qualify, but they made it to the round of 16. So I love looking back at plans from 4 or 5 years ago to see what happened after those visions were put. But that's exactly what the expanded nature pushed these countries to do. And again, that incentive will continue to grow for the federations that just made it to their first ever World Cup because they want to continue getting their team to the World Cup. But also those who came very, very close in the qualifiers and even made it to the playoffs. And maybe they were one goal off making it to the Women's World Cup. They will also have a bigger incentive because they just saw what this World Cup did for the plenty players that just made it. Some of these federations saw money this summer that they've never seen before, and including their players. A lot of the players got money in their pockets that they've never received before, which is fantastic. This is exactly what the players deserve. In some ways, I kind of feel like we shouldn't celebrate it because this is exactly what they deserve. And it's like, this is the bare minimum, paying them what they deserve. But at the same time, knowing the difficulties and the challenges that a lot of these players had to go through and a lot of the fights that they have had to fight for when it comes to pay and equal pay and any kind of pay that they're achieving right now, this came after a long fight. It didn't just happen because FIFA was feeling very nice and we're like, oh, you know what? Let's give him a few extra $1,000. No, this was a lot of lobbying. This was a lot of players that spoke their mind and voiced their concerns. And this World Cup payment-wise was the first one that we were like, right, this is a great step forward, and it's exactly what the players have deserved. It allowed a lot of these players to step down from second jobs and be able to train for their World Cup and prepare for the World Cup as professional athletes. There's no reason a player training from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. needs to go and have, a bar job from 5 to 10. There's no reason for that. And maybe those few extra dollars, and we've read a lot of articles from players that were very happy with the money they were getting out of the World Cup and said, yeah, I can step away from this second job and can prepare properly for the World Cup. Now, another concern also surrounded the fact that this was being hosted in Australia and New Zealand. Not only was it two different countries, but it was countries that were a little bit far away in terms of time zones. They were going to be tricky with Pacific time zones, EST time zones. It was not going to be the easiest to deal with, and there was a lot of concerns around viewership. We obviously saw the debacle of broadcasters in FIFA. I mean, literally going to the last minute of putting down deals and hosting and carrying those rights. But there was, again, understandably concerns that those numbers in the stadium were not going to be as high as one would hope for, and those viewership numbers were also not going to be as high as one would want to, because there's 3 a.m. kickoff times and 4 a.m. kickoff times, and the final was going to be at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. Like, there was concerns, but again, what this World Cup did is it answered every single concern around that. It hit new viewership numbers in 92% of those countries that carried the rights. I just want you to think about that statement. This is a number that FIFA has said, that 92% of the countries that carried rights for the Women's World Cup hit some kind of new viewership audience number. Either it had been in the group stages, in the round of 16, semi, quarterfinal, whatever stage, we saw a new record of how many people in the country watched a Women's World Cup game. 92% of those countries. We also hit the highest average number of fans that showed up to stadiums, and we also hit the highest ever number of spectators that showed up to those stadiums. And I understand there's an argument of, this is an expanded nature of a World Cup. Obviously, it was going to hit a new number of fans, but you wouldn't be able to hit that number without that average increasing. And I think that average number is actually a little bit more important than the collective overall number, because averages is what you're looking for. It tells a story about consistency. It tells a story about continually being able to hold a standard and a level of fans at a certain stadium. And that average number, again, debunks a lot of concerns. Now, I was able to reach out to FIFA to find out what that 8% of countries looked like and why did those 8% of the countries not hit new highs. And it looked like 90% of those 8%, that's a lot of stats there, were countries that didn't play at the World Cup. So you had Iceland, for example, a nation that unfortunately didn't make it to the World Cup, was a country that carried the rights and had rights for the World Cup, but were not able to hit a new high. Now, understandably, again, there's a time zonal difference, and the fact that they didn't have their country playing would excuse that, but I think sitting at 92% of countries that took rights, hit new highs, is just absolutely incredible to me. Australia versus Ireland, the opening game for the Aussies, was moved from an initial stadium to the biggest stadium available at the World Cup, and you best believe it was a sellout. FIFA publishing their numbers also came out and said that it exceeded the amount of sales and tickets. Merchandise was also a hit that they did not anticipate for, and the social media engagement was billions. I mean, I was looking at those numbers, and again, in some ways, I'm not surprised because I understand why this World Cup made the noise that it did, but you just love to see the numbers right in front of you, knowing there were so many doubters and there's so many, nobody watches women's soccer, which again, we do know is false, but when you look at those numbers, it's just a sweet feeling. I've said this in an earlier video discussing this specific topic, but this World Cup again showed us that it has never been a gap of talent. It's always been a gap of investment, and certain aspects that European teams could get away with couldn't get away with anymore. Stubbornness was something that was really interesting and common between a lot of the teams that crashed out super early. Germany were very stubborn, playing players out of position, and that was called out from the first game and even in the second game. But Germany, again, was very stubborn to play with what they wanted to play and kind of brushed over a lot of these issues. Brazil hadn't addressed a lot of issues that they faced in the Olympics, and again, it was a moment of stubbornness. I think even Beth Priestman played a little bit too predictable and was very stubborn to change some of her tactics. And maybe 4 years ago, that aspect of stubbornness, those teams could have gone away with. But what Jamaica against Brazil showed us and what Colombia against Germany showed us is that it's no more a talent gap. It's actually an investment gap. And now that's been closed down a little bit. Those stubbornness aspects you can't get away with anymore because you're getting caught out with it and you're being called out. Those nations got a big massive wake-up call, including the US, which again, I know the fashion that they got knocked out in, and that Sweden game was probably their best performance under Vlatko, but those group stages performances, specifically the one against Portugal and even against Holland, I would say, were a big massive wake-up call, and that is a wake-up call for the federation. They sacked their head coach, which also showed another aspect of stubbornness of substitutions or lack thereof substitutions. That maybe they could have gone away in 2019. If they were facing a lower ranked team that hadn't invested at all in their team, they could get away with some of these mistakes. But now that the stakes are higher than ever and the investment in the game is also higher than ever, and those players were actually able to step down from a second job and fully prepare, you're being called out in those mistakes that you shouldn't be having on the big stage. And I absolutely love a story of the veteran falling down and the rookie coming up and shattering all their dreams, because who doesn't love an underdog story? But again, it does show you that those big nations now will get a wake-up call and improve and get better and better. And those nations that are developing or on the rise will also continue to hopefully put in a little bit more investment. Like, again, I also want to preference by saying that all the investment terms that I'm talking about and those developing nations showing us what they can do, it is nowhere near enough the treatment that they should be getting. The investment and the funding that they're getting is also nowhere near enough. But it's slightly higher than 2019, and we're seeing glimpses of what if this team was fully supported? What if this team had been fully prepared? What if this team was given a proper camp where they didn't have to worry about pay negotiations? What if this team was given the players that they wanted to play with? Like, it was a lot of what if statements. Jamaica winning and making the history that they did, for example, or for Nigeria, who, again, made it through in very incredible fashion. We don't have to be having the discourse of, okay, where is the federation? Do they realize the gems that they have? It's the same thing that we saw with Spain. We need to be celebrating Spain and what they did and the achievement that they just put out on the World Cup. But instead, we're busy with those other conversations, which, again, are absolutely mandatory. But it hurts the fact that we need to be having those rather than celebrating the players. And again, I'm hoping in a few years, and again, that 2027 World Cup must be a reset to those conversations. We don't have to be talking about this anymore. This summer was a terrible summer for the club of people that said nobody watches the women's game. Nobody cares about the women's game. Women don't know how to play sports. They shouldn't be playing soccer. Because you know what? Every new fan has absolutely loved what they saw, and every existing fan is in joy of what they saw. This was the biggest FIFA Women's World Cup in terms of number, attendance, conversation, dialogue, media coverage, broadcasting rights. I also have to remind you, this was the first fully unbundled FIFA Women's World Cup rights, so meaning the broadcasters that carried the Women's World Cup. This was the first time that they got a deal just for the Women's World Cup. Usually and previously it had been, you get rights for the Men's World Cup and you pay a tiny little bit more to get the Women's World Cup, and it felt like the game wasn't really given the respect it deserved. So not only it was given that respect and it was valued on the market, but you had new bidders come in. BN Sports, for example, one of the biggest broadcasters in the MENA region, for example. They'd usually never had proper commentary or multi-language commentary on their platform for the Women's World Cup games. They also rarely ever had any kind of analysis shows on the women's game. And what we saw this World Cup was they actually had a lot of that. And their numbers were tripling from the 2019 Women's Cup. I mean, you had the group stages game for Morocco, I believe it was the one against Colombia, hit more numbers than the 2019 final did. Again, like, isn't that absolutely incredible? New markets invested and they got a lot of that money back. Fans were absolutely enjoying it. Australia and New Zealand were incredible hosts. The entire nation came up for it. Their fans, their media coverage, everything that Australia needed to do and New Zealand that they needed to do in order to make sure that this World Cup was the most successful. They absolutely did that. It's great to see the economic growth that they've received from this. Their tourism numbers are through the roofs this summer, and again, rightfully so. It caused a lot of noise. It caused a lot of people going there and visiting. And again, it is a very, very far place, but people still wanted to travel to see the country, see what it's about, but also see the World Cup. And that is exactly what you want your audience and fans to be doing. Leagues now need to recognize what this massive World Cup was. Make sure you're able to host in big stadiums. If that means going to the men's stadium and investing, because those games do cost a lot of money, do it, because that will bring in an average number of people and fans that you've always wanted to hit. Market your big games, market your derbies, market those big showdowns, market a good player. Like, we've seen what good marketing can do, and it will bring in numbers and it will bring in millions of dollars. Sell your kits, sell your goalkeeper kits. Like, we've learned so many lessons that actually are like lessons that would give the federation more money. So you kind of sit back and you're like, right, why, for example, is like Musevic's shirt not being sold when, you know, people would want to buy that and you will get money into it? Some of these manufacturers need to actually wake up and realize they can make money off of this. There's money opportunities, there's sponsor opportunities, there's fans willing to engage, willing to pay. Allow them and give them the opportunity. And funny enough, that really has been the conversation in the women's game. Give those players the opportunity and they will deliver. Never has an opportunity been presented in the women's game and the players absolutely messed it up. I mean, you're talking about a big game, they've delivered. You're talking about big investments, they've delivered. You're talking about unbundled broadcast rights, they've also delivered. They have delivered. Allow them the chance and they will deliver. A lot of these federations need to seriously wake up from whichever coma they've been in and recognize that they've got gems under them, and it's time to properly respect and give those players what they deserve, because they will also deliver for them. And a well-funded Nigeria team could be a very, very dangerous one. Next kick of the ball in the Nations League or the WSL or the Frauen Bundesliga will be very different than the last kick of the ball of their last season. Right now, we've entered a new era, the post-2023 Women's World Cup, and I'm very excited to see what the post-2027 Women's World Cup. This was the biggest ever Women's World Cup. You can even put it down as one of the biggest football events in history, in summer. I mean, whatever you want to label it as, it's probably a very fair labeling. It was massive. We need to continue on that hype. We need to continue that momentum. This is not a circus show that happens every other year. This is an event that we will be subscribing for every day because it happens all year round. I mean, the NWSL is going on right now. In a few weeks, WSL kicks off. The Champions League qualifiers are also about to kick off. There's always games going on. So let's cherish them. Let's enjoy them. Let's support the players. It happens all year round. There's almost always games going on. Tune in, watch, enjoy it, and support the growth of the game because it's great. We're very lucky to be living in this era. Now that my Women's World Cup chat is briefed up and wrapped up, there's a lot of questions that you guys have asked me in the comments about what to expect content-wise from my channel, and I can guarantee you it will still be very diverse and fun content around the women's game. I will have plenty of guests as usual, talking about different dialogues, talking about different questions. I'll be regularly putting analysis videos and other discussions, previews, and breakdowns of games. I most certainly will be covering the big stages and the group stages of the Champions League, as well as the WSL, occasionally the Frauen Bundesliga and Liga F. Being a Canadian myself, you would be expecting a lot of content around the Canadian women's national team when they're playing. I will hopefully also be in person for their September game, an Olympic qualifier against Jamaica. Hopefully I'll be able to bring you with me to the game. But on this channel, you'll be seeing a lot of frequent content, as frequent as I'm able to put up. On the channel, again, you will be seeing a lot of fun content. Let me know what you want to see and if there are certain guests you want me to bring back. A lot of the guests that you've seen will probably be coming back as well for a lot of previews and whatnot. Regardless, I just know that this is the place you need to be if you want to keep up with the game, know what's going on, engage in conversations that are important to have in the sport, and good dialogues that we must not shy away from. So let me know your thoughts. What do you want to see? What do you want to hear? I'm very much always happy to see what you like, because it's women's football, and that is certainly something that I don't ever shut down, and I'm always happy to listen to suggestions. Also, since it is September, it is very appropriate to say happy back to school season. I myself am going back to school now as well for university. A lot of kiddos like me back to college and uni and school. So I hope this year, the academic year, is a good one for you, and hopefully doesn't disturb a lot of the content in soccer that you're able to consume, because that is also very, very annoying when academics come in the way. But don't skip school. Make sure you're watching a lot of the soccer and enjoying it. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.